What's up, comic book fans? Anchorpete here, and from the Lassercast, my other channel, I have Mr. Danny Torkel, Dr. Zayas God. How are you doing today?
A little tired. Took a red-eye flight home from LA yesterday. We were on a family vacation. Hit up Universal Studios. We hit up the Warner Brothers tour. We did a ton of stuff. I'm exhausted. Charlotte and I actually, since you name dropped our channel, Charlotte and I went to a few horror shooting locations. We saw the actual Myers house in Pasadena, and then we went to we actually saw the other two houses from the original Halloween. The not the Myers house. It was the Doyle house and the Wallace house from the end.
Okay.
And then we saw 1428 Elm Street, which is not on Elm Street. It's on North Genesee Avenue in LA. And we did a couple videos from those locations. The Nightmare on Elm Street house, the Myers house. It was a lot of fun. Charlotte and I had a blast looking at a bunch of horror locations. She went with Athena to see some of the Buffy sites too, because they're big Buffy fans.
That's
So,
pretty awesome. Okay, cool. Well, in case you guys are wondering what we're here to talk about today, we are talking about Raised by Wolves, episode 5. And as you can tell from Danny's little discussion about his trip, he's a big film guy, especially horror. I think he's a big sci-fi guy. And over on our other channel, the Lassercast, we're actually going to be interviewing David Weiner, who he did all the In Search of Darkness documentaries 1, 2, and 3, and he has In Search of Tomorrow, which we're going to interview him next week about. And so the reason why I brought that up in particular is because they're going through all these movies from the 80s, all these sci-fi movies in the 80s, and every time I see something, I keep getting these flashbacks to Raised by Wolves. I'm like, oh, okay, that kind of reminds me of Raised by Wolves over there. And it's always this kind of dark, disturbing sci-fi. And I think that's where Raised by Wolves sort of lives, in that dark, disturbing sci-fi. Would you think this episode was a little bit disturbing this week, Danny?
I mean, there's one scene in this episode that is full blown horror. I even messaged you when I saw the thumbnail for this video that we're doing. I was like, you picked the right freaking thumbnail, because that is there's an image and there's a character in here that it's gonna last with you when you watch it. It is like we said it last week when it happened, that it was like shocking and brutal, but then to see what happens with that character this week, bah.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. So
absolutely insane.
yeah, so I figured that we could do what we did the last 2 times, where we talk about like specific characters, just go through their little journey, and let's save that part for the end, because that's just the fucking mind blowing crazy part. So I think that we should address his father and his creation, right? Because even though that's really interesting stuff, well, actually, honestly, I think Mother got the least amount of play out of everybody this episode, right?
Yeah, but in the little bit of time she had, she manages to uh, y- the way she forms bonds with people is very interesting. She's very condescending to Father now.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, not giving him any, maybe we should reprogram you because he's spending too much time on his own. Like, she even chastises him. Oh, the rumors are you've been fighting in your spare time.
Right. And
uh,
he's kind of like, what I do in my spare time is my own, right? Yeah. Very
yeah,
typical kind of marriage fighting, you know?
yeah. And but as far as Father goes, I love the way when he sees his creation and his first thought is to tell a joke, and
Right.
he goes right back to, like, he does go into that fatherly, make a stupid joke, make everybody, comfortable. And it seems to work a little bit with this new creation who's just kind of chilling there for a while.
Yeah.
Uh, so,
Yeah. That joke is a joke from season 1, which I think a lot of people felt like they were never going to hear the punchline for. You know, the joke with the glass of milk and the cat and the black hole. And I got to say, I was pretty satisfied with that punchline there. He says this other line to Mother in that discussion that you just referenced that I thought was a beautiful fucking line. It was like so telling of this show, where basically he said, like, I believe that we've become so human that we are not able to raise these children anymore. And I was like, that is like the nail on the head for this show, essentially. You know, it's like when you just think in terms of logic and you're thinking like a machine, you think about how to do things the right way. But once emotions get involved, once egos get involved, that's when things become complicated and dangerous. And I mean, that's the world that we live in right now, right? You know, we're doing this recording, and I think it's, you know, I try not to bring politics and shit into what we talk about, but right now there's a fucking battle going on in the Ukraine. And I see footage from that, and it reminds me of this show. And it's like, are we heading towards World War III and the end of the world? You know, it's just craziness. And I think that, and I know I'm kind of rambling, but that's so much of this show is like humanity had its chance. This is what it created. And now what happens moving forward? What is the next step? So what do you think about that, man?
I mean, I that's one of the main things that drew me to the show right off the bat was the idea of, you know, on both sides, you have, you know, the Mithraic and the atheists. They've both effectively given up on humanity. You know, you have the overzealous religious people who everything is Saul, 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 and then on the other side, they are equally as zealous, but towards technology, with whether it's mother and father, mother being a converted necromancer, or in at the beginning of this season, the trust, where effectively like just removing all decisions from humanity because we can't be trusted. And I think I brought this up before with this show. It keeps coming back to like that Asimov idea of every time they do something with robots in science fiction, it's like my first the number one reason I was created was to protect humans. And then always the robots realize very quickly that in order to protect humans, you need to get rid of all the humans because we're the ones causing all the problems. That's
Right.
Ultron in the MCU. That
Right.
is, and in the comics before that, that is the plot of iRobot, which was based on an Asimov story. And I think we do start to see a little bit of it here. You know, a lot of it in this show, especially when Mother is necromancing.
Yeah. Super intense, super scary stuff. And we saw a little taste of that in this episode with her when she was with Cleaver, right? So Cleaver, he is in the room where she was punishing the Mithraic guy. And oh no, he wasn't Mithraic, the guy that she was beating up. It
No,
was
the
like
atheist who committed the hate crime,
he
who's
joined.
now with Marcus.
Right. But she has that Cleaver guy.
Tamerlane? I think his name is Tamerlane.
I mean, there's so many characters on the show. It's like ridiculous. I mean, you gotta follow. But she used her powers, and just like her presence alone was causing him like pain, right? And just looking at her, that's how powerful a necromancer is. And that just kind of goes along with this thing. It's a concept that, I mean, you mentioned Asimov, but I've seen this a lot in shows I keep referencing, like Battlestar Galactica and Westworld. The idea that like humans are just as programmable as machines, or like we have our own routines and patterns.
She says that to him in that scene as well. Yeah.
Right. Go ahead.
No, it's just like I love the idea because, like, you know, you mentioned like it's hard not to pay attention to work. Like if the technology came around today to install, you know, AI to serve as world leaders, so there wouldn't be this polarization in politics, and there wouldn't be, you know, warfare going on and civil war and civil unrest. At what point does the AI now, are they tasked to give the power back? And then it's just a continuous domino effect.
Yep.
You know, I joke around with my students all the time. when it comes to things like the French Revolution. The whole idea of the French Revolution was get rid of the monarchy. They're the villains. They take the king and Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI. They chop their heads off. They install this, brand new. The monarchy's gone. Peace in France, and instantaneously they go into a reign of terror. And the person who personifies the French Revolution of get rid of the monarchy, freedom, 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 is now walking people to the guillotine to get their heads cut off for violating freedom of speech laws. And it's things like that. Yeah, Robespierre. Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course Robespierre, eventually they turn on him and he gets his head cut off. So it's just this continuous, basically the one thing humanity has showed us is that we are continuously flawed, and we need to be stopped.
Well, it's interesting though, right? Because we've kind of gone off these tangents. We were talking about mother and father. Now we're going off these tangents, but this is the juice of the show. This is why it's so interesting.
Are you saying that the people watching don't want to hear about the French Revolution?
Nah, dude, I'm all for it, man. Comparisons like that, bring that shit up. But what I was going to say was that Aaron Gukowski, right? That's how you say his name?
I think so.
The creator, right? I've heard him be interviewed a couple of times now, and they always ask him the same question right off the bat of what was the inspiration for this show? Because it's an original idea. It's not an adaptation. And he said that he was thinking about his children and their future and the idea of technology raising his children. He was looking at his phone and he was thinking this might evolve into something that could raise my children if I was to die. And I think that that's the main concept of this show is technology raising our kids because we've killed ourselves, right? And I think though that the show has evolved, and I don't know if this was always the plan from the beginning, but I think it goes along with what you're saying, which is we've almost kind of corrupted the technology, and our own human characteristics are making it something new, right? It's evolving. And I think that with just to bring it back to Father, his creation, that we keep saying that it is Saul, right? I have no idea what that is, but it's some kind of weird organic synthetic thing. It's something. And I'm wondering if ultimately it's going to be this sort of half human, half organic thing, half cybernetic thing that they're going towards. That's the end point, the fusing of the two,
Yeah.
I don't know what the fuck that thing is.
And I at the end of the episode, are we supposed to think that now Sue is hearing the same voice that Marcus heard, or is the voice coming from this thing, this creation? I keep making, I've made the Lost connection a couple times, but this show to me is doing a better job of addressing things that I want to see addressed in each episode, and then asking questions that I want to see answered in the next episode. And there's so many things like that. So, we get that scene with Marcus and his followers. We get, mother and father and their interactions, and then we're just left at the same time going, so what's now with Sue, and what's with this creation that Father made, and I every week, I'm literally, I was so tired when I got home today.
Yeah.
And I messaged you. I said, what time were we recording? I put this on HBO Max in my bedroom, and I think it took me about an hour and a half to watch a 55-minute episode because I kept falling asleep and then rewinding it. And then I finally got out of bed and I just watched the whole episode again on my phone. And so I love this show to the point where I'm willing to battle through it when I'm physically just worn down.
Yes.
And now I'm stuck in a position where I'm like, shit, now I got to wait until Thursday night. And
yeah. Well, that's the whole thing, right? And I think we should talk about Sue next, right? Because the stuff with Marcus, that's tied in with that oh shit scene that you were talking about. So we
Oh
kind of
yeah.
covered mother, we covered father, right? Sue essentially was the other focus, and it was mainly Sue trying to save Paul, right? And so he's in that weird cocoon, and she just starts having visions, like you said. You know, she has this vision where there's this like slug thing that she goes into the room with Paul's cocoon, and the slug thing is like in the room, but then all of a sudden it's inside this containment suit that she's in. And that reminded me, I mean, you've probably seen The Wrath of Khan, right, Danny?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like, you know, those brain slugs that they have that Khan puts with Chekhov and the other captain? That totally reminded me of that when it was like crawling inside her suit. And then it was like, that was actually kind of like a horror movie too, just seeing those slugs like on the sheet that was hanging over the cocoon. And I kind of thought, okay, well, there's something with the ecology of this planet. And like the creatures are kind of helping the people and they're hurting the people at the same time. She kind of made the connection of after she prayed that if you use those slugs, they'll help save Paul. And so, like, there's definitely some kind of like alien presence on the planet. I am not sure if it's like it's another version of humanity and it's come to this planet and it's like de-evolved, or if it's like a truly alien kind of.
Well, we also kind of saw that later on, where there's the scene where Marcus they uncover a new church on the hill,
Right.
and they go down. Marcus goes down into this pit, like lowered by this contraption, and
Right.
he uncovers. And this scene totally reminded me. Again, I feel like we're beating a dead horse here, but totally of Prometheus,
Yeah.
where it looked like an engineer uh, laying there, like the one from Alien back in 1979,
Right.
and then the I forgot what exactly causes like the reaction. There's
So Marcus has like
oh
a
the
medallion.
tooth,
Right.
right? He
Right.
has the Mithraic like
Artifact.
artifact, and it like causes this reaction where this humanoid being that is somehow still alive in this cave suddenly becomes one of the creatures from the acid ocean.
Right.
And so now we're left to think that all of the creatures from the acid ocean are devolved former humanoids from this planet.
Right.
And that goes back to Sue and her whole thing with like the prayer, and she has this great talk with Paul at the end, who is, the slugs end up working to cure him, and they have this, kind of intellectual discussion about, are you praying to God or are you praying to an alien? What's the
Right.
difference?
What's the difference? Yeah. Yeah.
And it reminds me of a George Carlin bit where he said, I'm gonna, and it's funny because in the George Carlin bit he said, I'm just gonna pray to the sun because
Right. Right.
it's all that, it's the only thing that's reliable, that's gonna show up every day no matter what.
Right.
And of course, the sun, Saul, and everything, but
Right.
it you think of even some of like the offshoot religions today, Scientology, Mormonism. There's sci-fi elements in those
There sure are.
religions,
Yes. Yes.
and I was on Hollywood Boulevard standing next to like the big church of Scientology, and thinking to myself like, like people believe that you can go and get your own planet somewhere. I always confuse Mormonism and
That's
Scientology.
Mormonism. A
Yeah.
planet. Yeah.
But
Um,
but I mean, L. Ron Hubbard was all about science fiction
right.
and interdimensional battles. So, is religion a belief in extraterrestrials? It's all it is believing in things that you can't actually see.
Yeah.
And, whether you call it God, whether you call it alien life, whatever it is, you can't see it. You don't know it actually exists, but you just have faith that it's there. somewhere out there.
Right.
And, and I thought that was a really interesting, especially for an adult and a kid to be having
Right.
that conversation at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, Paul is super wise, and he's like one of essentially like four characters that are potentially this prophesized, Messiah figure, right? There's him, there's Campion, there's Marcus, and then maybe like this creation that Father has made, this like potential Saul. Either one of those, and maybe and even the lizard, right? It could
Oh,
be
seven. Yeah.
right. So any one of those could be this Messiah creature.
I love, and that reminded me of one great little back and forth with mother and father where he was like, I have not skimped on my parental responsibilities. And she's like, well, you didn't really treat number seven well. And he's like, I don't care what you do with your animal.
Right,
And
right, right.
and he was just like, that's not my kid. That's
Mm-hmm.
a friggin' giant snake monster that you made with another robot.
Right, right. And that's so bizarre too, right? Because it's almost like that's the one that you had illegitimately with another guy. These are my kids over here. There's all these little metaphors. But going along with what you were saying about religion, and you referenced Prometheus, which we do every single time we talk. But
It's
it's just
hard not
because
to. I mean, Ridley Scott is ever present in this show. It's yeah.
exactly. I mean, because I know that, like, as a writer personally, I know that a lot of writers will see something and then they'll say, oh, well, I would have done this differently, or I would have done this better. And then they come up with their version. And I wonder if Guzikowski, he had that spark of like, okay, well, what if technology raises my kids? But then he's like, okay, well, Ridley Scott's involved now. I want to do my version of Prometheus. Because the thing about Prometheus and the Alien movies, or what Prometheus says about the Alien movies, is the idea that these engineers created human life on Earth, and that humans go to another planet to find that life, and then they find the engineers, and then through all this weird kind of interactions and things infecting other things, you get like the xenomorph. And on this show, you have, like you said, a creature that was kind of like the engineer, just in the tunnel for like thousands of years potentially, and then it like de-evolved into a thing that's like the xenomorph. I mean, it's not literally a xenomorph, but
No.
it's like you have an engineer and a xenomorph right there.
And I think that goes back to the idea that humanity is our own worst enemy. Is our need to find answers to questions that aren't necessarily answerable, or that just are beyond our comprehension, and our desire to find those answers very often leads to our downfall, whether it's the nuclear weapons, or splitting atoms, or in the case of, I mean, I remember Prometheus, the whole movie is, they go because they see cave paintings and they're like, let's find where humanity comes from. And I remember the first scene where the engineer wakes up and he just grabs and rips David's head off, and I was like, oh, there you go.
Yeah, well, the thing about Prometheus and then Alien Covenant is that Prometheus alludes to the idea that like the engineers, there's something grand, there's something bigger, and they are the ones that like either have encountered the xenomorph or they're like making the xenomorph. Then in Alien Covenant, the idea is that like David essentially creates the xenomorph, right? And in my mind, like I said, as a writer, to like make it kind of better or make it kind of work, in Prometheus, they go into a cave that's very similar to the cave that Marcus is in this episode, and there's a xenomorph like on the wall in a picture, right? Like a cave picture. And so I took it like David essentially made the xenomorph, but like maybe that's sort of like that's a thing that you would imagine, or if you middled around with the stuff, you would make this. That like it is sort of this like evil, this thing that he essentially brought into the world as this like perfect killer. And I think that there's just like so much overlap with that idea and this show of like kind of what we're imagining as our religion and like what's evil and what's God, and then like making it into the real world using technology and engineering. So it's crazy shit. I mean, that actually brings us up to the scene, that crazy fucking scene. So we've already kind of talked about that xenomorph creature, which Marcus dispatches just by shooting it in the head. But that's all happening while there is total insanity happening on the surface, right? Do you want to describe that for our viewers?
So Marcus gets lowered in this, like, you pull the chain, you have to reach your arm into the hole in the church, and apparently there's a lever that lowers this like seated ball that connects to a chain, and it lowers him down into this hole where you see like a snake serpent monster skeleton in there, which I thought was really cool. The
Right.
production design on this show is friggin' amazing.
Incredible. Yeah.
But so Marcus goes into the cave and he encounters this, for our purposes, we'll call him an engineer type person. While that's happening, the other Mithraic are up there in the rain praying in a circle, and all of a sudden you see one of them get like hit in the back with something. You don't know what it is, but you see blood is starting to pool. And Vril, who is barely a little girl anymore, she has like the just the shredded remains of like robot face,
Right.
And which is now probably one of the scariest things I've ever seen. And
Correct.
she goes on a rampage, brutally stabbing and murdering every remaining Mithraic except for Holly, right? That's her name, Holly?
Holly is the girl that was with mother and father.
Yeah.
Yes.
Who hid. All
Right.
the other Mithraic, especially like the High Council, is just brutally murdered. Like hand cut off, shot in the head, throat sliced slowly, arms and necks broken in terrible ways. And
Yeah.
and then it ends with her chasing down Decima, who is her mother,
Right.
and basically saying, I want you to feel what I felt. And as Marcus eventually makes his way back up, it's like blood is dripping on his head, and he looks up and Decima is hanging there from the chain, dead, with her face slashed like completely off. My God, what a scene. And she's still around, so I'm like, and this is a character who I feel like, what's going to happen when she encounters Campion and Paul again? Because she was on their side, especially Campion, who she had like this like little android human kind of like flirty relationship with. And I'm like, what's going to happen when they see her, what she's become, and now with her like attitude change? I don't even know what you call it. I mean, she's an android, but my God. This was one of the, like when people say genre, when people say, oh, we work in genre films or genre shows, and they typically mean anything that is like horror, sci-fi, fantasy.
Correct.
This scene is perfect genre filmmaking, TV making, whatever you want to call it, because this was a sci-fi show about, we've seen killer robots, 1984 Terminator. We've seen killer robots our entire lives. I've never seen anything like this, and it was legitimately terrifying. Like, I was in bed and I'm like half asleep watching this the first time, and that scene comes, I'm like, oh. To the point where like I was like, Pete better put this as the thumbnail on today's video, and you did without me having to say so. Great job. But I was just like, my God.
Man, I wanted to like message you and be like, oh my God, you see that scene, or wait till you see the scene. But I also wanted it to be like completely shocking, because it is very shocking. It goes from, they're having their little, meeting or whatever, they're all praying, and then all of a sudden it's a horror movie. It legitimately is a horror movie, like you said. And one thing that you didn't mention was that Decima gets in the tank and she's driving away, and it's very reminiscent of so many horror movies after you have one of these kind of like slaughter scenes where all the main characters get taken out. If we're going to reference Alien and Prometheus and stuff, it is just like in Aliens. There's a couple of scenes like it where there's like when what's his face, Paul Reiser, Burke, he's able to
Yeah.
get away and he hides and he thinks he's safe, and then he turns around and there's the alien, right? Or when all the Colonial Marines get taken out, and then there's the pilot and the other guy on the ship, and then the pilot turns around and the alien's gotten on the ship. That's very much like that scene with Decima and Vril on the tank, where you see Vril and she's out of focus and she just kind of slinks down. That is a straight up horror movie. And her face is like something out of like a 1970s horror movie, just like super, super intense and scary.
I think I think it reminds me of the movie poster or like the VHS box of Westworld,
Right.
where it was Yul Brynner.
Right.
That Westworld was, I know there's the show, which I haven't watched, but the original movie, I think, was with Yul Brynner, and he plays like the cowboy android. And the VHS box just had like it had Yul Brynner standing there like with a gun, and then it was like Yul Brynner again, but this time his face was open, and it was like the robot face on the inside.
Right.
And that's what that scene creeped the hell out of me. That box creeped the hell out of me, and this scene was yeah.
There's quite a few like scenes like that in comics and then in cartoons. In Batman the Animated Series, of all places, there was like a cyborg kind of intelligence called Hardak, and there were these robot copies of people, and there is at least one scene, or I think multiple scenes, where like the face gets kind of pulled away and it's got that cyborg, the big bulging eyes. Go ahead.
I mean, Chris and I have said this many times. The scariest scene in any movie ever made is the end of Superman 3. And when that woman gets like caught in the machine and becomes the robot and her eyes glow, my God, that is nightmare fuel. I'm going to be 40 years old. Still, to this day, gives me nightmares.
Well, I gotta warn you, Danny, because we are watching that In Search of Tomorrow documentary. It is like 5 hours plus, but that scene, they show that fucking scene when they talk about Superman 3. So
wonderful. I'm only up to 1982. My Wi-Fi wasn't working on the plane, so I was stuck. I made it about an hour in at the airport, and then once we got on the plane, I was in dead silence.
Yeah. 1982, the year that I was born, and also the year of like the best science fiction movies ever, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you like The Thing and Blade Runner and E.T., I mean,
into those movies.
Yeah, but, some minor films.
Well, speaking of the sort of the skeleton face of an android too, if you guys, because we keep pushing In Search of Tomorrow, you guys should definitely check that out on the Lastercast. They talk about Terminator, and this is a little spoiler because you're not up to 1984 yet, but they talk about how the T-180, the Arnold, Terminator.
T-800, right?
T-800, right. What the fuck? I got T-1000. T-800, thank you. That like the actual skeleton face of it is based on Arnold. Like they put a cast on Arnold's face, and like that's Arnold's teeth that the teeth are modeled after too. So, we've obviously seen this sort of peeled away face, and it's such a disturbing thing. I think that Raised by Wolves just goes the next step by making it on essentially like a teenage or not even teenage girl, right?
Yeah.
So there's that slaughter, and then once again we're left with Marcus, and we've talked about this before, where on the show roles change, things flipped on a dime. He had this growing congregation, now it's just down to him and Holly, and it just keeps flipping. He's there, and we know that Father's heading towards him with one of the original Mithraic guys. Lucius, thank you so much. Yeah. So we don't know what's going to happen there. Probably someone will get killed, or Father will get killed again and brought back to life. But the episode itself ends with this scene with Sue, and she's having those voices in her head. Could you make out what they were saying?
I couldn't. They were loud enough to hear, but not. I didn't hear specific words.
Yeah, I couldn't really tell. I thought they said Mary at one point, which that was her original name before she changed her face.
Oh,
and
yeah.
became Sue. I think that the voice said that to her. I'm not sure. But it's very interesting because obviously this has happened to Marcus, and it's turned him into a believer and a radical. And then now it's happening to Sue, who, for the most part, I mean, you've said this yourself, that she's sort of like the most relatable character on the show, or like the most rational character. So for her to be having these voices in her head, that's a scary thing.
Yeah, but also, you're also getting it from like the parent perspective, where, if a miracle happened to save my kid or your kid, it would change the way we felt about, it would probably instill us with a certain level of faith that we might not have had before. And so something is talking to her. And it's, again, we've heard about a signal. We don't know if it's father's new friend. Yeah. There's a lot of potential suitors for who's speaking.
Yes. So with that being said, I think Danny and I have wrapped up our discussion of episode 5 of Raised by Wolves. It was entitled King, which there's a lot of potential kings in this episode. But we'll be here next weekend to talk about episode 6. Our discussion of In Search of Tomorrow won't be popping up until 2 weeks from now. But I highly recommend that documentary. If you ever want to see our interviews with David Weiner, you can also go over to the Lastercast channel and watch our interviews about In Search of Darkness. But yeah, Danny, I am totally down for talking to you next week.
Definitely.
Voice. Oh, look at this. Hey, Bruce, way to come in at the last minute, buddy, and give us what we were looking for. Voice asks Mary to plant seeds for the tree for payment. Well, holy shit. I can't believe I missed that. Thank you, Bruce. And thank you for watching.
To be fair, my wife was in bed sleeping, so I couldn't have the volume all the way up.
Right. And I watch the show.
Thank you, Bruce.
Like, I watch it on my laptop. I watch it on the treadmill. I watch it on my phone sometimes. So, like, I was like, what the fuck is it saying? Yeah, thank you, Bruce. If you guys have not liked and subscribed, please do. We always love comments and more conversation from you guys. But one last thing I will say is that Brian and I, since Peacemaker's not on and Moon Knight's not out yet, Brian and I are going to actually be talking about another HBO Max show, Doom Patrol.
Euphoria.
Euphoria, yes. Doom Patrol and then Euphoria together, yes. 2 middle-aged white guys with beards talking about Euphoria. That sounds right. So anyway, we'll see you guys next Sunday or Saturday for more Raised by Wolves.